So right now in Italy, millions of cars are hitting the road. I mean, in the first half of 2025 alone, daily trips hit 102.7 million.
Which is a staggering volume of traffic.
It really is. But here is the statistical paradox that's just, well, completely breaking our modern infrastructure. Out of those 102 million trips, a massive 81.3% of them are under 10 kilometers.
Right.
And nearly a third of them are actually under 2 kilometers.
hmm
We are using massive, 2-ton 20th century combustion machines to essentially travel the distance of a long driveway.
Yeah, the data paints a picture of a really profound behavioral shift. I mean, the average trip length has actually dropped from over 11 kilometers back in 2019 down to just over 9 kilometers today.
Wow, so we're just making shorter and shorter trips.
Exactly. Our daily lives are becoming increasingly fragmented and highly localized, yet we're navigating this new reality using a transportation model designed for an entirely different era.
Which brings us to the mission for today's deep dive. We are looking at a really fascinating document for you today, specifically Chapter 4 of a report on something called Mobility 5.0.
That's a great chapter.
It really is. And the core argument here isn't just about, swapping out gas engines for electric batteries to save the environment. It's an exploration of how we have to fundamentally redesign the systemic relationship between people, vehicles, buildings, and our physical space.
Because right now, we are living through a severe geographic and infrastructural mismatch. We've inherited this sprawling, heavy, 20th century built environment.
The highways and the massive parking lots, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about massive multi-lane highways, endless acres of surface parking lots, and zoning laws that basically force communities to be entirely dependent on personal cars.
I was reading this and thinking, trying to fit our 21st century localized travel into 20th century highway infrastructure it's like trying to run modern high-speed fiber optic internet through old copper plumbing pipes.
That's a really good way to visualize it.
The physical infrastructure fundamentally bottlenecks the actual behavior.
And that bottleneck creates what the researchers identify as a massive systemic cost. When we assess the environmental and economic impact of a car, the conversation usually just, well, stops the exhaust pipe.
Right, the emissions.
But the true systemic cost is vastly larger. It's the physical geometry of the space the car occupies while it just sits parked, which is, by the way, 95% of the time.
95%. That's wild when you actually stop to think about it.
It is, and it's also the raw materials, like the steel, the lithium, the rubber trapped inside it. It's the continuous maintenance of the asphalt it drives on, and the urban sprawl it mathematically requires to function.
The report highlights the systemic burden so perfectly. I mean, in Italy alone, there are 41.3 million cars on the road, and the average age of those vehicles is almost 13 years old.
Which is an enormous amount of physical capital and material just immobilized in a highly inefficient system.
Using a 2-ton metal box to travel 2 kilometers is it's like using a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. I mean, it works, but the collateral damage is massive.
Exactly. The collateral damage is the point.
But let me challenge the core premise here for a second, just to play devil's advocate. The prevailing narrative right now is that the electric vehicle is the ultimate solution, right? So if we just transition those 41 million combustion cars into 41 million EVs, doesn't that solve the environmental crisis without having to, redesign all our cities?
It solves the tailpipe emissions, sure, but it completely ignores the spatial and economic geometry of the problem. A shiny new EV still gets stuck in traffic, bleeding economic productivity.
Right. A traffic jam of EVs is still a traffic jam.
Exactly. It still requires a concrete parking spot that eats up incredibly valuable urban real estate space that could otherwise be housing or green space. The heavy battery still causes immense wear and tear on the roads.
Which means we're still paving over nature to accommodate them.
Yes, and crucially, a one-to-one swap of gas for electric does absolutely nothing to solve what the report calls transport poverty.
Ah, transport poverty. This is where the economics of mobility become deeply regressive, right?
Yes, the lowest income demographics often end up being the most aggressively dependent on private cars, because affordable housing is frequently pushed to the peripheries of cities.
Where public transit is usually inadequate or just non-existent.
Exactly. So these families are forced to absorb the costs of car ownership just to function in society. They are trapped paying for the insurance, the unpredictable maintenance, the rapid depreciation, and, fluctuating energy costs.
They literally have to surrender a disproportionate percentage of their wealth simply for the right to participate in the economy.
Right. And an electric vehicle does not fix that structural inequality. In some cases, the high upfront cost of an EV actually exacerbates it.
So if the vehicle itself isn't the silver bullet, the focus has to shift from making the engine more efficient to making the geography more efficient. What are the actual levers we can pull to change a system that it's entrenched?
Well, the report outlines how Mobility 5.0 operates on three integrated environmental levers. And the first lever is arguably the most counterintuitive. It's just reducing useless miles.
Meaning the greenest, most efficient mile is the one you never had to travel in the first place.
Precisely. We have to stop trying to optimize the commute and instead focus on eliminating the need for the commute entirely.
Reorganizing things.
Right. This involves reorganizing our territories so that essential services, hybrid work hubs, and daily necessities are brought physically closer to where people actually live.
Okay, that makes sense. And the second lever the report outlines focuses on assigning the right mode of transport for the right trip. This introduces the concept of intermodality.
Which is a crucial shift in thinking.
Right, so for you listening, instead of relying on a single car for an entire journey, intermodality treats travel like a relay race. You might walk or use micromobility like a shared bicycle or a scooter for a 2-kilometer trip.
And then for high-demand commuter corridors, you rely on rapid collective transit.
And for an 800-kilometer journey, you shift to high-speed rail.
Right, and under that framework, the private vehicle is reserved only for where it adds irreplaceable value. So things like rural connectivity or the absolute first and last mile of a complex journey, you stop using a massive machine for a localized task.
Which leads perfectly into the third lever, turning passive infrastructure into productive assets.
This one is really innovative.
The report describes taking things that currently just sit there, like a sprawling asphalt parking lot that just absorbs heat and causes runoff, and giving them a job. You integrate solar canopies over the parking spaces to collect energy.
You install permeable surfaces to harvest rainwater.
Buildings themselves act as energy accumulators, physically interacting with the plugged-in vehicles to balance the local power grid.
But, theorizing these levers is the easy part. Proving they actually work economically requires massive computational power. To model this, the researchers didn't rely on historical trends. They used something called a digital twin.
Let's dig into the mechanics of that, because a digital twin, in this context, isn't just a 3D architectural rendering or like a fancy video game map.
No, not at all. It is a heavy-duty, data-ingesting calculation tool.
It's simulating reality.
Right. The digital twin calculates the true systemic cost by running massive simulations. It ingests layers of data, real-time mobility flows, topographic constraints, local energy consumption, land use values, and demographic variables.
There's a lot of variables.
It allows researchers to mathematically test different configurations of a city to find the exact layout that produces the lowest overall systemic cost.
The report actually runs several specific simulations using this twin, starting with simulation A, which models localized proximity.
And the results there are fascinating.
When the twin reorganizes a territory to prioritize distributed local services, the outputs completely flip our traditional understanding of transport economics on its head. It doesn't just reduce CO2 and relieve the pressure on land from parking.
No. The twin proves that household spending goes down and the amount of time lost to driving just plummets.
Because when you sit in traffic for 6 hours a week, you aren't just losing patience, you are bleeding what the report refers to as time capital.
Yes, time capital. Giving time back to a person has a quantifiable, tangible value. It improves public health outcomes through reduced stress, it increases community engagement, and it actually drives local economic productivity.
That concept of time capital becomes even more stark in Simulation B, which models long-distance travel. The twin looks at an 800-kilometer trip.
A classic long-haul drive.
Right. And if you shift 70% of that distance away from highways and onto a rail network, ensuring, a shared vehicle is waiting for the traveler for that last mile at their destination, the active driving time absolutely craters.
And when active driving time drops, the quality of the traveler's time fundamentally transforms. A trip stops being a pure human cost.
Think about your last long road trip. You get those 6 hours back. You can sleep, you can prepare for a meeting, you can read.
It changes the entire experience of travel.
I have to challenge the logistics of this broader vision for a second. I hear bring everything local and shift to high-speed rail, But redesigning entire city blocks and duplicating services like clinics in every neighborhood, I mean, that sounds incredibly expensive.
It is a massive upfront investment.
Right. So how does the math on that actually work in the real world without bankrupting a municipality? Does this Mobility 5.0 model only function in wealthy, highly developed nations that already have, massive transit budgets and beautiful train networks?
That is the exact friction point planners face.
Yeah.
And it's why the report actually pivots its focus to a global scale, specifically modeling emerging markets like in Africa.
Okay, so expanding the lens.
Counterintuitively, the most dramatic economic benefits of Mobility 5.0 aren't found in places with legacy wealth. They're actually found in developing regions.
Wait, really? How does the math favor regions with less capital?
Let's look at Simulation C from the report. If emerging markets attempt to copy the 20th century Western model, so heavy urbanization, centralized megacities, and massive car dependency, they are going to run headfirst into an overwhelming infrastructure deficit.
Just trying to build it all from scratch.
Exactly. The estimates in the source indicate that pursuing that old model requires between $130 and $170 billion a year just to build and maintain what they call heavy linear infrastructure.
And by linear infrastructure, we're talking about the endless miles of concrete highways, the reinforced bridges, the sprawling interchanges designed to support the constant weight of thousands of heavy vehicles.
Yes, the incredibly expensive heavy concrete stuff. But if these regions adopt the principles of Mobility 5.0, creating what the report calls a smart living ecosystem, the physical requirements change entirely.
Because they're designing for proximity from day one.
Right. By focusing on distributed local services, smart villages, telemedicine, and digital education, they don't have to engineer massive freight corridors just to move basic daily goods and services.
So by establishing decentralized microgrids and local service hubs, the daily need for constant, heavy commuter traffic just evaporates, meaning the physical road itself doesn't need to be engineered to the tune of billions of dollars to support it.
Which allows these nations to avoid 20 to 30% of that heavy linear infrastructure entirely. It is a massive opportunity for leapfrogging.
Oh, like leapfrogging the technology. Just as many developing regions skipped the expensive copper wire phase of landline telephones and jumped straight to mobile cellular networks.
Exactly that. They can skip the 20th century mistake of paving over their entire landscape. By avoiding that unnecessary heavy infrastructure, the digital twin calculates they can save between $25 and $50 billion annually.
That is a staggering amount of money. So sustainability here isn't a Western moral luxury. It is a highly aggressive, economically efficient development strategy.
Absolutely, and the global quantifications the report extracts from these simulations are just incredible, especially when you contextualize them against the current baseline.
Right, because right now, road transport generates over 6 gigatons of CO2 globally every single year.
It's massive. But the human toll is even darker.
Yeah, the World Health Organization baseline shows roughly 1.19 million traffic deaths annually. It is a systemic failure of safety that we've just, for some reason, accepted as a normal cost of doing business.
But the simulation models, what happens if we begin pulling these Mobility 5.0 levers globally? If just 10% of global road demand adopted these principles, shifting to intermodality, reducing useless miles, we could avoid 150 million tons of CO2.
And more crucially, by mathematically reducing human exposure to road risk, the model says we save 23,800 lives annually.
Just at a 2% adoption rate.
And if that adoption rate scales to 50%, you are looking at 119,000 lives saved every single year and 750 million tons of CO2 avoided.
It's game-changing. Plus, the report cites a World Bank estimate that low- and middle-income countries need $417 billion a year for resilient transport.
Right, so if this systemic shift frees up even a fraction of that by avoiding heavy infrastructure, that is billions of dollars of capital that can be reallocated directly into schools, healthcare, and climate resilience.
That macro-level reallocation is powerful. But the true genius of Mobility 5.0 is how it changes the economic velocity at the microscopic level in your local neighborhood.
Yes, let's talk about the domino effect.
The report details how this philosophy turns local territories into living laboratories. They highlight the Migliature project operating in Italy and Switzerland, which essentially tests these concepts in small towns.
And the fundamental shift here is almost semantic, right? The definition of a successful transport network is no longer how fast can you move through a place, it becomes how well can you stay.
Exactly. The focus is on the quality of staying, not the speed of leaving.
I want to break down exactly how that changes the local economy, because the source runs a really brilliant simulation on slow tourism and agriculture.
The math on this is fascinating.
Let's trace a single euro through the local economy in both scenarios. In a conventional tourism model, you have, say, 10,000 overnight stays, generating about 1.2 million euros in direct spending.
But under that conventional model, the tourist is essentially treating the town like a drive-through. They arrive via highway, stop briefly at a centralized hotel, maybe visit one major attraction, and then drive right out.
The infrastructure basically encourages them to leave.
Right, because the infrastructure encourages rapid transit, the money leaks out just as fast.
Yeah.
Out of that 1.2 million, only about 420,000 euros actually stays circulating in the local economy. And the local agricultural sector, the farmers, see only about 96,000 euros of that revenue.
Right. But under a Mobility 5.0 integrated model, the architecture of the town encourages the tourist to stay longer. They use local micromobility, they cycle, they eat locally sourced food, and the math changes completely.
It's a huge jump.
The retained local value jumps from 420,000 to 720,000 euros. And the direct revenue for local farmers more than doubles, jumping to 216,000 euros.
And the most important mechanism to understand here is that this massive economic increase doesn't happen because the town spent millions on marketing to bring in more tourists.
The baseline number of visitors stayed exactly the same.
Yes. The growth happens purely because of a better organization of the tourists' money. The tourist isn't funneling cash into a multinational gas station on the highway. They're renting a bike from a local shop, buying wine directly from the vineyard, taking a cooking class in the village square.
By slowing down the mobility, you literally trap the capital inside the community.
Exactly. Every trip you don't have to make to the big city is $1, an hour, and an ounce of energy kept inside your own neighborhood.
It's like we've been treating our local towns like drive-thrus. Mobility 5.0 turns them back into destinations. And that exact same logic of localized velocity applies to a much more critical sector, which is healthcare.
Healthcare is really the ultimate test of systemic cost.
The report introduces the concept of cluster healthcare, or sanita agropolo.
Right. The old model of medical infrastructure either builds massive, highly centralized mega hospitals and forces everyone to drive to them, or it abandons underfunded local clinics entirely.
Which is terrible for the patients.
It is. The cluster model creates a hub-and-spoke system. You maintain the local neighborhood clinics, but you connect them digitally to the major centralized hospitals through teleconsulting, interoperable digital health records, and remote diagnostic equipment.
Because the logistics of rural or suburban healthcare place a massive, completely uncalculated burden on the sick. I mean, driving an hour down a congested highway when you are already vulnerable or in pain is just a terrible user experience.
It's cruel, frankly.
The Twin actually ran a simulation on this for a population of 20,000 people. Typically, that population generates about 12,000 trips a year just to see specialists at the centralized hospital.
But by utilizing this connected local clinic model, they found they could completely avoid 35% of those trips.
35%. The systemic savings from avoiding those trips are extraordinary. Mathematically, it eliminates 378,000 kilometers of driving.
It rescues 8,400 hours of lost time for patients and their caregivers.
And just indirect out-of-pocket transport costs, gas, tolls, vehicle wear and tear, it saves those families over 132,000 euros.
And that is just the financial math. The human benefit is profound. You are removing an immense amount of physical and psychological stress from vulnerable people.
Plus, the local doctors get to upskill by constantly consulting with specialists, meaning the local clinic regains its status as a trusted pillar of the community.
And the major hospitals aren't clogged with routine diagnostic cases that could have been handled remotely, freeing up beds for acute emergencies.
This simulation perfectly exposes why the accounting of our old infrastructure system is fundamentally broken. When a government looks at a local clinic, they usually only measure the operational cost of keeping the doors open, right?
Right, they look at the budget line item.
They don't measure the vast systemic savings it generates by preventing hundreds of thousands of kilometers of driving. Every euro invested in that local clinic doesn't just buy a medical procedure. It acts as an infrastructural shield.
It avoids a long car trip, it reduces carbon emissions, it keeps a healthcare worker employed locally, and it supports the local pharmacy. It creates an entire cascade of local economic resilience.
So we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We've looked at the spatial monopoly of the automobile, the leapfrogging potential of emerging markets, and the localized economics of tourism and healthcare.
It's a lot of intersecting data.
It is. When we synthesize all these simulations from the sources, what is the ultimate conclusion of Mobility 5.0?
The overarching takeaway is that environmental impact and economic impact are no longer competing forces. They are the exact same metric.
Which goes against everything we've been taught.
Completely. For decades, we have been conditioned to view sustainability as a moral sacrifice, an expensive luxury that, slows down economic growth.
That going green costs you green.
Right. But this report proves through hard computation that reducing the systemic cost of how we move is actually just a highly aggressive, highly efficient allocation of resources.
It liberates capital trapped in depreciating metal boxes and redirects it to families. It rescues our time from traffic bottlenecks.
It statistically saves tens of thousands of lives by engineering the risk out of our daily routines.
And it builds wealthy, self-sustaining local communities. Sustainability isn't a moral sacrifice, it's just efficiency.
The future of mobility isn't about figuring out how to power the car of tomorrow. It's about deeply questioning the need for the trip in the first place and realigning our geography to generate the maximum possible value for human society, rather than just optimizing for the machine.
And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day, building on that concept of time capital we unpacked earlier.
It's an important concept to reflect on.
The simulations proved that if every million users who skip a long drive save 12 million hours a year, what is the hidden, uncalculated economic value of your lost time? If you could reclaim the hours you currently spend white-knuckling a steering wheel and staring at taillights, and instead reinvested that time purely into your local neighborhood, what kind of entirely new local economy could you single-handedly help create?